Have you ever walked into your home, expecting one thing, and found something so insane it made you question reality? That was me last Tuesday. I thought I was being a good husband. My shift ended early because of a power outage at the factory, and I figured, why not pick up Katie's favorite cheeseburgers from Marty's Diner? Maybe we'd sit on the couch, eat, and laugh at those trashy shows she loves so much. Simple, right? But when I stepped inside the trailer, everything felt wrong. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No TV blaring, no music, no Katie yelling at contestants on flipped or flopped. Just a heavy, unnatural quiet that made the hairs on my neck stand up. I put the food down on the counter and called out, "Katie?" Nothing. I walked into the living room, glancing around. Her shoes were there, kicked off like always, but her purse wasn't anywhere. The throw blanket she usually draped over herself when she watched TV was balled up on the armrest. It was like she'd been there, but something had pulled her away. "Katie?" I called again, louder this time. Still nothing. My stomach tightened as I headed toward the back. The bedroom door was half open, and the bed was a mess. Sheets tangled, pillows on the floor. It wasn't like Katie to leave things in such disarray. She had this thing about keeping the bedroom tidy, even if the rest of the trailer was a disaster. I stepped inside, and that's when I noticed it. A faint, sweet smell hanging in the air. It wasn't Katie's usual perfume. This was something else, something floral and cloying, mixed with a hint of sweat. My chest tightened as I scanned the room. There were clothes scattered on the floor, but not mine. A shirt that was too big for Katie. Jeans that didn't look familiar. "Katie?" I said again, my voice sharper now. The bathroom door was closed, but there was a shadow moving underneath it. My pulse quickened. I took a step closer, my breath hitching in my throat. "Are you in there?" I called out. For a moment, there was silence. Then her voice came through the door, shaky and muffled. "Yeah, I'm in here. What are you doing home so early?" Her tone sent a jolt through me. Katie was many things. Bossy, blunt, occasionally overdramatic, but nervous wasn't one of them. Something was definitely off. "Power outage," I said, stepping back. "I brought food." "Oh," she said, her voice still strained. "That's nice. I'll be out in a minute." I stood there for a moment, staring at the door. My gut was screaming at me to push it open, but my head was telling me to give her space. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe she was just, cleaning the bathroom? Hiding a mess? None of it made sense. I walked back to the living room, but I couldn't sit still. The silence was suffocating, and my mind was racing. The smell, the clothes, the tension in her voice. It all felt wrong. And then I saw it. Alan's truck. It was parked a few houses down, tucked partially behind one of the neighbors' sheds. My heart sank. Alan had been around a lot lately, fixing things, dropping off tools, hanging out for no apparent reason. At first, I thought nothing of it. They were cousins, after all. But now, with everything else, the sight of his truck made my stomach churn. I paced the small living room, glancing back toward the bathroom. What was I supposed to do? Kick the door down and demand answers? Wait until she came out and act like nothing was wrong? My hands clenched at my sides as I tried to steady my breathing. A few minutes later, Katie emerged from the bedroom, her hair slightly damp, her cheeks flushed. She froze when she saw me standing there. "Oh," she said, her voice unnaturally bright. "You're still here." "Yeah," I said, crossing my arms. "Where else would I be?" She laughed nervously, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. I thought you might have gone to grab something from the truck, or, I don't know." "Why would I do that?" I said, my tone sharp. "Alan's truck is parked down the street, isn't it?" Her face paled, and for a split second, I saw panic flicker in her eyes. But she recovered quickly, forcing a smile. "Oh, Alan? He stopped by earlier to drop off some tools. Didn't I mention that?" "No," I said flatly. "You didn't." Katie moved to the counter, grabbing one of the cheeseburgers. Her hands were shaking slightly as she unwrapped it. "Well, it's not a big deal. He wasn't here long." I stared at her, my jaw clenched. Every instinct was telling me she was lying, but I couldn't prove it. Not yet. So I stayed silent, watching her closely, waiting for her to slip up. "Why didn't you answer when I called out earlier?" I asked after a long pause. She glanced at me, her movements pausing. "I didn't hear you. I was in the bathroom." "Right," I said, the word heavy with disbelief. "And the mess in the bedroom?" Katie's face turned pink, her hands fidgeting with the burger wrapper. "I was looking for something," she said quickly. "I must have made a mess and forgot to clean it up. I've been all over the place today." "Uh-huh," I muttered, still watching her. The tension in the room was unbearable. Katie kept her eyes on the counter, eating in small, deliberate bites, as if she could make the moment pass if she just ignored it long enough. I didn't press further. Not yet. But deep down, I knew this was far from over. Katie's hands trembled slightly as she unwrapped the cheeseburger. She took a bite, chewed once, then set it down, her eyes darting toward the bathroom door. She wasn't eating. She was stalling. I sat across from her, watching the nervous fidgeting she tried to hide. My mind was racing. The bedroom in disarray. The strange clothes. Alan's truck parked just down the street. And now, the bathroom. Something wasn't right. I couldn't take it anymore. The tightness in my chest demanded answers, or at least the chance to confirm what my gut was screaming. "I'll be right back," I said, standing abruptly. Katie froze mid-motion, her hands hovering above her lap. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice a little too casual. "Bathroom," I said flatly, keeping my tone even. Her face shifted, just for a second. Panic, quickly masked by a forced smile. "Oh, it's kind of a mess in there," she said. "I was cleaning earlier." "Doesn't bother me," I replied, already moving toward the door. She didn't try to stop me, but I felt her eyes burning into my back as I approached the bathroom. My pulse pounded in my ears as I gripped the handle and pushed the door open. The smell hit me first, floral and faintly musky, the same unfamiliar scent that had clung to the bedroom. It wasn't overpowering, but it lingered in the air like a secret. The room itself seemed untouched at first glance. The sink was dry, the towels hung neatly on the rack, and the floor was clean. But then I noticed the window. It was wide open, the curtain billowing slightly in the breeze. Katie hated open windows. She was always on me about keeping them shut, complaining about bugs and dust. My stomach tightened as I stepped closer, peering out. The patch of dirt and dry grass behind the trailer stretched toward the empty lot at the edge of the park. It was still and quiet, nothing out of the ordinary. But something felt wrong. I leaned out slightly, scanning the area. The wind rustled the weeds near the back fence, and a faint metallic scent lingered, sharp and fleeting. I couldn't pinpoint what it was, but it gnawed at me. I closed the window with a quiet click, locking it out of habit. My reflection in the glass stared back at me, tired, tense, and unsure. Turning back to the bathroom, I noticed something else. Faint scuff marks near the base of the toilet. They were subtle, barely visible against the linoleum, but they stood out to me. I crouched down, running my hand over them. The marks were fresh, recent, like something heavy, or someone, had moved hastily. The room was quiet now, the faint buzz of a light bulb the only sound. I stayed crouched for a moment longer, my fingers tracing the marks as my mind churned. What the hell was going on? Standing up, I glanced around one last time. The towels, the sink, the mirror, everything seemed normal, but it wasn't. The energy in the room felt charged, like it had just been vacated in a hurry. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself before stepping out. When I walked back into the living room, Katie was sitting stiffly on the couch, her cheeseburger untouched. She wasn't scrolling through her phone anymore. Instead, her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her posture rigid. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice a little too bright. "Fine," I said, settling into the armchair across from her. "You didn't tell me you left the bathroom window open." Her head jerked slightly, her lips parting as if she were about to say something. But then she stopped herself, her gaze flickering to the side. "Oh yeah, I must have forgotten. Sorry about that." I nodded slowly, studying her. Katie never forgot little things like that. She was meticulous, always nagging me to shut windows and lock doors. Her sudden lapse in habit felt too convenient to be real. "It's fine," I said, letting the silence stretch. I wanted to see if she'd fill it, if she'd crack, but she didn't. Instead, she grabbed her phone from the coffee table and began scrolling again, her face a mask of forced indifference. Her thumb moved across the screen, but her eyes didn't seem to focus on anything. It was an old trick. Pretend to be busy when you want to avoid a conversation. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. Katie retreated to the bedroom early, claiming she had a headache. I stayed in the living room, nursing a beer and staring at the muted TV. My mind kept replaying the small inconsistencies, the little details that didn't add up. I wanted to confront her, to demand the truth, but I wasn't ready. Not without proof. Later that night, I crept back into the bathroom. I needed to see it again, to confirm what my gut was telling me. The air was cooler now, and the room felt less charged, less alive. But the scuff marks on the floor were still there, faint but undeniable. I crouched down again, running my fingers over them. They weren't from me. They weren't from Katie. I stood up, my hand brushing the edge of the sink, when I noticed a small glimmer on the floor beneath it. A button, plain and unremarkable, resting just out of sight. I picked it up, turning it over in my hand. It was dark, smooth, and familiar in a way that made my stomach twist. It didn't belong to me. Or Katie. I stared at the button for a long time before slipping it into my pocket. I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't imagining this. Something was going on. And Katie wasn't telling me the truth. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the bathroom window, the scuff marks on the floor, and the button that didn't belong. My mind replayed the day's events on an endless loop. Katie's shaky voice, her evasive answers, and the way her hands trembled when she thought I wasn't looking. She was hiding something. I knew it in my gut, but I couldn't figure out what. And that button in my pocket felt like it weighed 100 pounds. At around 2 a.m., I gave up on trying to sleep and slipped out of bed. Katie stirred slightly but didn't wake. She'd gone to bed early, claiming a headache, and had barely said 2 words to me since. I crept into the living room, the dim light from the street lamp outside casting long shadows across the trailer. I pulled the button out of my pocket and held it up, turning it over in my fingers. It was plain, dark, and utterly unremarkable, except for the fact that it shouldn't have been in my bathroom. I sat on the couch, staring at the button like it held the answers I couldn't find. Then my eyes drifted to Katie's phone, sitting on the coffee table. She always kept it close, but tonight, for whatever reason, she'd left it behind. My heart pounded as I reached for it. I wasn't proud of what I was about to do, but I needed answers. If she wasn't going to tell me the truth, I'd have to find it myself. The screen lit up when I pressed the button, and her lock screen appeared. Just a picture of our dog, Max, sitting on the porch. No notifications, no missed calls. I tried her passcode, her birth date. It didn't work. I tried again, this time using our anniversary. Still nothing. Frustrated, I set the phone back down. Katie had changed her passcode. She'd never done that before. The knot in my stomach tightened as I leaned back against the couch. She was slipping up, leaving clues without realizing it. But she was also being careful. Too careful. The next morning, Katie acted like everything was fine. She made pancakes for breakfast, chatted with the kids, and even laughed at one of my dumb jokes about the syrup bottle. But I wasn't fooled. Her smile was too bright, her laugh a little too forced. I watched her closely as we ate, noticing the small details I'd missed before. The way her eyes darted to her phone whenever it buzzed. The way she pressed her lips together when I asked about her plans for the day. Got anything exciting going on today? I asked, keeping my tone casual. Not really, she said, flipping her hair over her shoulder. Just some errands. I thought I might stop by the hardware store to grab a few things for the bathroom. The bathroom? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Yeah, she said quickly. You know, for cleaning. I want to get some of those grout scrubbers. The tiles are looking a little grimy. I nodded slowly, pretending to buy it. Makes sense. Want me to come with you? Her smile faltered for a split second. Oh no, that's okay. I'll be quick. Besides, don't you have stuff to do around here? Not really, I said, leaning back in my chair. I figured I'd take the day off. Catch up on some things. She hesitated. her fork pausing halfway to her mouth. Well, if you want to come, I guess that's fine. But it's just boring errands. You'll probably be bored out of your mind. Maybe I'll skip it then, I said, watching her carefully. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, and she smiled. Good idea. I didn't let it show, but her reaction only made me more suspicious. Katie was always complaining about how I never ran errands with her, how I never helped out with the little things. Now she was trying to talk me out of it? After breakfast, she got ready quickly, grabbing her purse and keys. I'll be back in a couple of hours, she said, giving me a quick peck on the cheek. Take your time, I said, keeping my voice light. As soon as the door closed behind her, I grabbed my phone and opened the tracking app I'd installed the night before. I felt a pang of guilt. It wasn't exactly the most ethical move, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to know where she was going. The blue dot representing her phone moved steadily across the map, heading toward Main Street. I expected her to stop at the hardware store, but she didn't. She kept going, driving past the shopping center and into a quieter part of town. I watched the dot stop at an unfamiliar address, a small house at the end of a cul-de-sac. My stomach twisted as I stared at the screen. This wasn't the hardware store. This wasn't any place I knew. Without thinking, I grabbed my keys and headed out the door. The drive was quick, but it felt like an eternity. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. As I approached the house, I slowed down, parking a few houses away. The driveway was empty, but Katie's car was parked along the curb. I sat there for a moment, trying to decide what to do. Confront her? Wait until she came out? My pulse pounded in my ears as I stared at the house, the curtains drawn tightly over the windows. Then I saw it, a figure moving behind the curtain. A man. My heart dropped into my stomach. I didn't recognize him, but I didn't need to. The way he moved, the way he glanced toward the door, like he was waiting for something, it was enough. I forced myself to stay calm, to think. Confronting her here, now, wouldn't do me any good. If this was what I thought it was, I needed proof. Concrete proof. Pulling out my phone, I snapped a few pictures of the house, making sure to get her car in the frame. Then I drove away, my mind racing. This wasn't over. I drove aimlessly for a while after leaving that house. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my fingers started to ache, but I barely noticed. My thoughts were racing, flipping between anger, disbelief, and the crushing weight of knowing that someone, was threatening to shatter everything I'd built with Katie. By the time I pulled into the parking lot of a quiet diner on the outskirts of town, I'd convinced myself of two things. First, I wasn't crazy. Whatever was happening with Katie, it wasn't just in my head. And second, I needed to stay calm. Charging in blind, throwing accusations, wasn't going to solve anything. If I wanted the truth, I had to be smart about it. I ordered a coffee and sat in a corner booth, staring at the pictures I'd taken of the house. Katie's car was there, clear as day. The curtains were drawn tightly, and the house itself was nondescript. A single-story home with peeling paint and a few overgrown bushes in the yard. Nothing about it stood out, except for the shadowy figure I'd seen behind the curtain. Who was he? And what was Katie doing there? The coffee tasted bitter, but I barely noticed. My mind was churning, replaying every odd interaction I'd had with Katie over the past few weeks. The missed calls, the sudden changes in her schedule, the tension that seemed to hang in the air whenever we were alone together. How long had this been going on? And why now? When I got back to the trailer, Katie wasn't home yet. I sat on the couch, flipping through channels on the TV without really watching anything. My phone buzzed, and I glanced at it. A message from Katie. Running late. Traffic's awful. Be home soon. I stared at the screen, my jaw tightening. Traffic? We lived in a small town where traffic meant getting stuck behind a tractor for 5 minutes. I didn't respond. Instead, I grabbed another beer from the fridge and waited. She came home about an hour later, her smile a little too bright and her voice a little too cheerful. Hey, sorry I'm late. The hardware store was packed, and then I got stuck behind some idiot on the highway. I nodded, forcing a smile. No worries. Did you get what you needed? She held up a small plastic bag. Yep. Scrubbers, gloves, and some grout cleaner. Gonna tackle that bathroom tomorrow? Sounds like a plan, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Need any help? Nope, she said quickly, heading toward the kitchen. I've got it under control. I watched her unpack the bag, noticing how her hands shook slightly as she pulled out the items. She didn't look at me, didn't ask about my day, didn't offer any of the usual small talk she'd normally use to fill the silence. The tension between us was palpable, but neither of us addressed it. That night, as we lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. Katie turned away from me, her breathing slow and steady like she'd fallen asleep easily. But I knew better. I could tell by the slight twitch of her fingers, the way her body tensed whenever I shifted. She was awake, and she was avoiding me. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I couldn't keep living like this, second-guessing everything, piecing together scraps of information without ever getting the full picture. I needed answers. The next day, I decided to take action. After Katie left for work, I grabbed her spare set of keys and drove to the house from the day before. I parked a few houses down, just like I had before, and walked up to the front door. My heart pounded as I knocked, half hoping no one would answer. The house was silent. No movement, no sound from inside. I tried the doorknob. It was locked. I glanced around, making sure no one was watching, and walked around the side of the house. The backyard was overgrown, weeds and tall grass stretching up to my knees. A rusted patio chair sat near a cracked sliding door, its glass streaked with dirt and grime. I tried the sliding door, but it didn't budge. Frustration bubbled in my chest as I peered through the glass. The house looked empty, bare walls, minimal furniture, and no sign of life. It was like no one had lived there for years. But that didn't make sense. Katie's car had been here just yesterday. I'd seen her go inside. I'd seen someone moving behind the curtain. My pulse quickened as I stepped back, scanning the yard for any sign of what I'd missed. That's when I noticed the faint tire tracks in the dirt near the edge of the yard. They were fresh, leading toward a narrow path that disappeared into the trees beyond the property. My stomach churned as I crouched down, running my fingers over the grooves. Someone had left recently. Someone in a hurry. I snapped a few pictures with my phone and walked back to my car, my mind racing. The house had been a front, a meeting place. Whoever Katie had been with wasn't sticking around. They were covering their tracks, just like she was. By the time I got home, Katie was already there, standing in the kitchen and scrolling through her phone. She looked up as I walked in, her smile faltering slightly. Hey, how was your day? Busy, I said, keeping my tone casual. Yours? Same, she said quickly, putting her phone down. Just work and errands. Nothing exciting. I nodded, watching her closely. Good to hear. She shifted under my gaze, her fingers tapping against the countertop. You hungry? I was thinking of making pasta. Sure, I said, leaning against the doorway. Sounds great. As she turned to grab a pot from the cabinet, my phone buzzed. I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. A message from Mark, my best friend. Need to talk. Call me when you can. I slid the phone back into my pocket, glancing at Katie as she moved around the kitchen. The cracks in her story were widening, and I was getting closer to the truth. Whatever was going on, I wouldn't stop until I uncovered it. When the truth finally hit me, it wasn't at some strange house on the edge of town. It wasn't in the cryptic texts or the fresh tire tracks that I'd pieced together like a puzzle. No, the truth hit me right in my own home, the place I'd thought was mine to trust and protect. It was a Wednesday evening, and Katie was being Katie. She'd made dinner, chatted about her day, and acted like nothing in the world could touch her. But something in her tone, her smile, felt off, like she was playing a role in a bad movie and expected me to believe every word. That night, she went to bed early again, claiming she wasn't feeling well. I stayed up in the living room, sipping a beer and staring at the blank TV screen. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, like a storm brewing just beyond the horizon. Around midnight, I heard it, the faint sound of the bedroom door opening, followed by soft footsteps. My chest tightened as I turned off the lamp and sat in the dark, waiting. Katie didn't go to the bathroom or the kitchen. Instead, I heard the faint creak of the front door. I moved quickly, grabbing my phone and stepping silently toward the door. I peeked out the window just in time to see Katie walking toward the side of the trailer, her figure barely visible in the pale moonlight. My pulse quickened. What the hell was she doing? I slipped on my shoes and followed, keeping my steps light and careful. As I rounded the corner of the trailer, I saw her silhouette near the back door, the one we almost never used. She glanced around nervously, then opened the door and stepped inside. The knot in my stomach tightened as I crept closer. I pressed my ear against the door, straining to hear. At first, there was nothing, just the faint hum of the refrigerator. Then, I heard voices. Hers, and a man's. My hands clenched into fists as their words became clearer. She was laughing softly, her tone low and intimate. His voice was deeper, confident, filled with the kind of familiarity that made my blood boil. "I missed you," he said, his voice dripping with smugness. "I know," Katie replied. "I've been waiting all day." My vision blurred with rage, but I forced myself to stay quiet. Bursting in now would only give them the upper hand. I needed to see it, to burn the truth into my memory so there was no doubt, no room for excuses. I reached for my phone, activating the camera as I pushed the door open just enough to peek inside. The sight stopped me cold. Katie was sitting on the couch, her legs draped casually over his lap. Her lover, Alan. His arm was slung around her shoulders, his other hand resting on her thigh. They were so comfortable, so at ease, like they'd done this 100 times before. I snapped a few pictures, my hands shaking with anger. They didn't notice me. They were too busy whispering to each other, lost in their sick little world. But I wasn't done. Pushing the door open with a sharp shove, I stepped inside, my footsteps heavy and deliberate. "Well, isn't this cozy?" Katie froze, her face draining of color as she turned to me. "Andre, don't," I snapped, cutting her off. My voice was low, cold, and trembling with barely contained fury. "Don't even try." Alan jumped up, his face a mix of guilt and panic. "Hey man, this isn't." "Shut the hell up," I growled, stepping closer. "You don't get to talk." Katie stood, her hands outstretched like she could calm me down. "Andre, please, just let me explain." "Explain what?" I shouted, my voice echoing through the trailer. "That you've been sneaking around with your cousin in our home? In my bed? You think there's anything you can say that'll make this better?" Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't care. Not anymore. Alan shuffled nervously, his hands raised like he was ready to bolt. "Get out," I said, pointing to the door. My voice was steady now, sharp and commanding. "Both of you, get the hell out of my house." "Andre, please," Katie started, but I cut her off again. "Out," I roared, my patience snapping. Alan didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed his jacket and bolted, brushing past me without meeting my eyes. Katie hesitated, her face crumpling as she tried to speak. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I stared at her, my chest heaving. "Sorry doesn't fix this. Get out." She didn't move at first, but when she saw the look in my eyes, she finally stepped toward the door. She turned back once, her lips trembling as if she wanted to say something. But I didn't give her the chance. The door slammed shut behind her, leaving me alone in the trailer. The silence was deafening, but for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to clarity. I'd caught them. There was no going back now, and whatever came next, it was going to be on my terms. When the door slammed shut behind Katie, a wave of emotions hit me all at once. Anger, sadness, relief. The kind of cocktail that leaves you feeling numb and buzzing at the same time. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the empty living room. The silence was deafening, but it gave me space to think. I wasn't the kind of guy to let things slide. Not this. Not after what I'd seen. Katie and Alan hadn't just betrayed me. They'd done it under my roof, in the home I'd worked so hard to provide. That kind of betrayal needed a response. Not just anger or yelling, it needed action. The first thing I did was pack Katie's things. Every piece of her clothing, every photo, every little reminder of the life we'd built together went into garbage bags. I didn't care where she stayed or what she did next. As far as I was concerned, she was no longer welcome here. Once her belongings were out of sight, I turned my attention to Alan. The thought of his smug face sitting on my couch, touching my wife, made my blood boil. He thought he could sneak around and get away with it. But he was about to learn that I wasn't someone you crossed. I didn't go to sleep that night. Instead, I spent hours crafting a plan, not just to confront Alan, but to make sure he felt the weight of what he'd done. By morning, I was ready. The first step was simple, a call to his boss. Alan worked at a local auto shop, and I happened to know the owner. I'd helped him out a few times when he needed someone to haul scrap metal or fix a broken fence. We weren't close, but we were friendly enough. "Hey, Dave," I said when he picked up. "Got a minute?" "Sure, Andre. What's up?" "Well," I began, keeping my tone casual, "I thought you might want to know what your employee's been up to." I didn't hold back. I told him everything. How Alan had been sneaking around with Katie, how he disrespected my home, my family. Dave was silent for a moment, then let out a low whistle. "That's low, Andre," he said. "I don't tolerate that kind of behavior. Don't worry, I'll take care of it." I thanked him and hung up, a small sense of satisfaction settling in my chest. Alan might have thought he could ruin my life and walk away unscathed, but I was making sure his actions had consequences. The next step was more personal. I printed out the photos I'd taken, Katie's car parked outside the house, her and Alan on the couch, and left them in an envelope on her parents' doorstep. I didn't write a note. The pictures spoke for themselves. Katie had always cared about her family's opinion. Letting them see the truth was just another way to ensure she felt the weight of her choices. But revenge wasn't enough. I needed to move on. I spent the next week cleaning the trailer from top to bottom, scrubbing away every trace of Katie and Alan. I rearranged the furniture, replaced the bed sheets, and even repainted the bedroom. It wasn't just about the physical changes. It was about reclaiming my space, making it mine again. Katie tried to call a few times, but I didn't pick up. She left voicemails, crying and apologizing, begging me to talk to her. But I deleted them without listening. There was nothing she could say that would undo what she'd done. One day, she showed up at the trailer, standing on the porch with tears streaming down her face. "Andre, please," she said, her voice trembling. "I made a mistake. I know I hurt you, but we can fix this. I love you." I stared at her through the screen door, my expression cold. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this," I said simply. "Go." She hesitated, her shoulders shaking as she sobbed, but I didn't budge. Eventually, she turned and walked away, and I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. The final step in my plan was taking care of myself. I started going to the gym again, reconnecting with old friends, and focusing on the things that made me happy. It wasn't easy. There were nights when the loneliness hit me like a freight train, but I reminded myself that I deserved better. A few months later, I filed for divorce. Katie didn't fight it. She signed the papers without a word, and just like that, our marriage was officially over. The day the divorce was finalized, I took myself out for a drink. As I sat at the bar, nursing a cold beer, I realized something. I was free. Free from the lies, the betrayal, the constant weight of wondering what Katie was hiding. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled.